Living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Hello, friends. Once again, it's Dr. Carol, and this is Relationship Prescriptions. So glad that you are part of our podcast family. My guest today is somebody that I have listened to and read for many years. Dan Miller is president of 48 Days. He specializes in creative thinking, helping people at all stages of their career blend natural skills and abilities, unique personality traits, dreams and passions to find the work that God has called them to and find that purpose in life. He's been a featured speaker on a number of media programs and continues to be. Speaks in churches all over. His book, 48 Days to the Work You Love, has been a New York Times bestseller. He and his wife, Joanne, have been married somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 years. They have 3 children and 12 amazing grandchildren. I think you will find this conversation so encouraging at whatever stage in your life or career you may be at this point. Dan truly believes that you can find or create work that is meaningful, purposeful, and profitable, and that is who God calls us to be. I pray that you stay tuned through this whole episode because it will be so encouraging for you. Here is my conversation with Dan Miller. Well, Dan Miller, it is really an honor to bring you to our audience. Thank you for being a guest on our podcast.
Well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for asking me.
I was reading some of your material, and I have read so much, and it's been such a help to me personally. But I read a phrase that really stuck with me. You believe that we can be fully alive in our work. Now, in our ministry, we use the line, living fully alive. That's how God made us. But in the work world, that is a specialty area of yours. You really believe we can be fully alive at work?
I certainly do. I would cringe to think that we cannot, that we would have to spend the major portion of our time doing something in which we were not fully alive.
I have had many people talk to me about how do I find my purpose and wrestling between calling and purpose. And one of the first things that I'd like you to maybe unpack is this whole idea of calling. You know, some people feel like God gave everybody else the important callings if they're, a minister or a preacher or have a great big platform. And they may feel like, well, did God leave me out? How can I make a difference? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and that's a legitimate question. I mean, even theologically, we've been kind of misled into thinking that, well, if God called you, then you're going to be, as you alluded to, you're going to be a pastor, teacher, evangelist, missionary. Those are the callings. The rest of us are just kind of left out with nothing specific. We just kind of have to get through life. That's really a disservice to everybody to think that.
Now, you grew up in a pastor's family, I understand. So this was some talk and some messaging that you had to work through personally.
It really was. Yeah, my dad was a pastor. So there was that. And I really felt like I had this fear as a kid that if I really submitted myself to God, he was going to make me go somewhere like to Africa and I'd be miserable as a missionary. Well, that's a really immature theology. And I've discovered along the way that what God calls us to gives us great joy, and we can feel fully alive. And I do believe that everyone has a calling. My yard guy was here this morning. Now, he's Hispanic, went to the 6th grade, and this is what he does. His work is magnificent. He's been doing our yard work for 18 years. And here it is in the spring. I'm excited. He's excited. He's describing all these wonderful things they're going to do to have my place looking beautiful. I believe that's his calling. I would hate to try to talk him in to do something else that we thought was somehow more godly than that. I mean, and to bring to life God's creation, I think that's a perfect example of a true, authentic calling.
Thanks for describing it that way. When we think of God's kingdom, too often we think of it as church only, but doesn't God own everything? I mean, isn't everything we have just on loan? It's entrusted to our care. So whatever we are caring for in God's world, really, that can be our calling.
Totally. We have a grandson living with us right now. Came here from Colorado. We live here in the Nashville, Tennessee area. He wants to be involved in Christian music, and we think that's really cool. But in the meantime, he needs to do something to provide his own food and a roof over his head. He can live with us temporarily, but not forever. So he's working as a server at one of the restaurants. Well, at first he thought, I didn't come here to wait tables. I said, well, that's okay. But you have to do something responsible to support this calling that you know that you have. Well, guess what? In the meantime, he's discovered he can be a real light where he works. He loves being there. He loves being an example to the others. We're in a place where there is a lot of pessimism and negative thinking. No, he can be a real light. And now people are asking him, why are you always so optimistic? What causes you to feel about life as you do? I mean, what an opportunity to be a witness in that environment. That's a legitimate part of calling. Even if the work you're doing is not the ultimate dream job, you still can see it as part of your calling to be salt and light where you are.
Thanks for giving that example, because I think many of our listeners will really resonate with that wherever you are right now, you can be part of bringing God's kingdom into where you are. But I know you talk a lot about a purpose, and let's kind of shift a little bit to that term. If God creates us with a purpose, how do we find it? How do we know that? Is that something God just kind of drops from the sky? How do we understand that?
Well, that's a great question, and it really kind of ties into what I was just talking about there, because sometimes we think that God's purpose is this mysterious thing, and we have to have that road to Damascus experience in order to really understand what it is. No, I think we have plenty of clues. We have clues all along the way. What is it that your curiosity draws you to? What is it that you're naturally talented in? What are those things that keep coming up where you realize, wow, I really enjoy this? Those are clues. I think God's calling, God's purpose is going to tie right into what we already are gifted in, what we already naturally enjoy. See, that's where there's a disconnect. People assume that God's calling is going to negate everything that I enjoy. That's just me, but God's will is something. Why would we do that? I mean, that's what, as a parent, and I have a little child who's really interested in science, let's say, and I'm going to say, oh, no. We want you to major in literature, English literature, instead of that. A parent wouldn't do that. A parent's going to say, oh my goodness, that's awesome that you're excited about that. We're going to get you a Lego set. We're going to get you things that embrace what we see brings you joy already. I think our Heavenly Father does exactly the same thing.
So seeing what brings us joy is part of understanding our purpose. Any other ways that you help people in discovering what that is?
There are really three primary things that I want somebody to look for. And we can do this at any point. You can do this as a 16-year-old or as a 30-year-old or as a 55-year-old. But just take a fresh look at these three areas. What are your skills and abilities? And that's the power of having a little life experience, because you get clear on what those are. Things that you know you can do, but also things you enjoy doing. So skills and abilities. Second area is what I call personality traits. How do you relate to other people? What kind of environments are you most comfortable in? There's no right or wrong, good or bad in that. Some people are more comfortable being in a real active social kind of situation. Some people are more introverted and shy. That's fine. Let's find opportunities that embrace those things you know about yourself. Then the third area behind what I call skills and abilities and the personality traits are values, dreams, and passions. What are those things that you're naturally drawn to, that you just really enjoy, that you see those recurring patterns showing up? Trust those as part of God's call and God's purpose. And when you know those things about yourself, then you can very clearly identify, what should I spend my time doing? So I think 85% of the process of having clarity about what God's call is about looking inward, looking at what he's already told us. It doesn't have to be some mystical looking out, hoping for a new revelation. Look at what he's already told us. We have a lot of markers along the way.
Is there an example or two that maybe you can give us about what that might look like for somebody who's wrestling with this idea?
Sure. Yeah, golly, I loved it. I've been working with people a very long time, and so I have lots of examples. But as I stand here in my office, I'm looking at this beautiful, beautiful painting that I have on the wall. Well, that was done by a young man who came to me, and he was a pastor. He had a dramatic conversion experience in his own life, and he thought, well, the most godly thing I could do, obviously, would be a pastor. Went to seminary, got ordained, and as pastor of a little tiny church. And of course, they were paying him peanuts. He was struggling. They had 5 small children at the time, and he was working as a desk clerk at a hotel overnight during the week just to try to keep the lights on in his house. Well, he came to me, frustrated. The church sent him to see me. And I said, man, who sold you this bill of goods? And he was really taken back. He was like, well, what do you mean? Am I not doing the most godly thing possible? I says, not at all. I says, you're an imposter. You're trying to be something you're not. I said, what is it that when you're doing it, time just flies by? He said, oh my. He said, I'm so stressed out. But he said, what I do is I sneak away to a little room in our rented house and I lock the door. I put on Beethoven and Mozart and I paint. He paints. Now, he had never done anything with that. I had him quit everything he was doing, including pastoring a church. For 4 years, he did faux finishes where he used brushes, sponges, rags to create these dramatic effects on people's walls. That gave him the freedom in that period of time to do what he does today, that being these dramatic pieces of art. He does pieces of art that are nothing but music themes. Now he's known as an artist. And here's the deal with that. We think, well, wow, did he walk away from God's call? Not at all. His calling was not to be a pastor. That's where we get confused on the application. If his calling is to bring hope and encouragement to people, we can identify a whole lot of different careers where that's possible. You don't have to be a pastor or a missionary in order to make that happen. You can do a lot of other things. For him, his talents are as an artist. So today he's making 5 times the income he ever made. That wasn't our original goal. Yes, we needed some relief for him, but the goal was to just find this sweet spot, this fit. And the other part of that as well is, was he effective in really being salt and light and leading people to the Lord in what he was doing? He said, as a pastor, people knew what he was going to say. He had the same little group of people. Now he's a really well-known, well-respected, credible artist. He's in people's, fancy homes. He says they share their hurts and their fears and vulnerabilities with him readily. He has way more opportunity to minister to people today than he did before.
Oh, that's an awesome example. And it leads me to a kind of question that I wanted to ask you as well. People who may be in a job, whether it's a pastor or some other position, that they have thought that this was where God called them, that this is a godly position, but they hate it. They're miserable. How do you help people there? What would you say to people who are totally miserable in the position that they think God asked them to be in?
Well, we want to take a fresh look at those 3 areas that I mentioned. What are your skills and abilities? What are your personality traits? What are those recurring values, dreams, and passions? But here's another example. Worked with a gentleman. He was 42 years old. He was a dentist, very successful, very committed Christian, very strict legalistic church he was involved in, and he was a dentist. He was on heavy medication for depression, and he also had and just working with him, try to unpack what is your life all about? How can you be so far off track? Well, it became clear that here was the situation. This is so common. His parents were blue-collar workers. He was an only child. They decided in advance they were going to have a professional child. They sent him to the finest university, sacrificed in order to do so. He had fine cars going through school, came out of dental school. Here he is, a respected dentist in his community. And he's clearly living his parents' dream, not his own. Mm-hmm. Now, he had the ability to do what he was doing, but there was no connection with his real passion, his real dream in doing that. This is how bad it was in that situation. In talking to him about other things that he was doing, it became obvious to me that he had an ultralight, which is a little airplane. It's like a go-kart with wings. And I thought, oh my goodness, that must be really cool to be up there, above, up in the clouds, flying around, looking down at your house in the community. He says, Dan, I hate heights. I care nothing about airplanes. But he said, one of these days, that little plane is going to go down and people will remember me as a respected dentist.
Oh, my.
It was his escape plan. That's the only reason he had it, was a politically correct, socially acceptable way to check out of the miserable life that he had created for himself. As soon as we started getting him healthy, he sold that little plane that he had. He also sold his dental practice, went back to school and got licensed as a family counselor. Absolutely loves what he's doing. There's so much danger in pursuing a career path that really is somebody else's expectations or based simply on the ability to do that. I mean, I've worked with a lot of physicians, attorneys, dentists, pastors who have proven their ability to do what they do, and they've created a life that they hate.
Wow. That story just kind of gets, really burrows deep into my heart. Something that if I were listening to you, I might wonder about. You're talking about joy and meaning in the work that you do. You're also alluding in several ways to financial return. And let's just, raise the question, do we have to be poor to honor God? Where does money fit into all of this?
Wow, that's a great question. I love that setup because it does come up so frequently. Again, we sometimes are taught that it's more godly to be poor. I mean, I was raised with that theology. My dad, money was kind of a dangerous thing. And you're really safest to not have any. Well, if you believe that, trust me, you'll not have any. But if you believe that we can be worthy stewards of resources that God gives us, and then when we really get in that sweet spot, now as like the young gentleman I talked about who was a pastor and now he's an artist, when we have that blend of passion and talent, money shows up often in unexpected ways. Money just kind of is a natural offshoot of a natural fit for our passion and talent. So it can be expected to show up. What it amounts to really is when we are operating in our giftedness, we are at the very highest level of serving other people in some way, whether that's as being my yard guy or driving a truck or being a brain surgeon or whatever it happens to be. But we've really figured out how can we serve people best and serve the most people. Well, what happens when you're doing that, there's a pretty natural connection to generating money. Everything that I'm doing today grew out of a Sunday school class. I wasn't teaching that Sunday school class as a way to make money. I was doing other things.
Right.
But as I had so much response to that Sunday school class, and it grew and grew and grew, and we had people coming from other churches and other states to that Sunday school class, and then they'd stay after and talk to me and ask me for resources and ask me to meet with their son or their cousin or their next door neighbor. All these opportunities just exploded out of that. From teaching Sunday school, where I had speaking opportunities and writing and coaching and putting together live seminars on Saturdays. those things, have generated money. And then I started putting those concepts, those principles together in books like 48 Days to the Working Law, which, went on to be a New York Times bestseller. Sure, it's generated a lot of money. There's no secret about that. I'm doing exactly what I think God positioned and prepared me to do, serving people in this spot. And the natural outcome of that generates money that most people dream of.
That resonates with me. The idea that as you serve better, the rewards come and allow you to serve even more when you are in that sweet spot.
Absolutely.
Last kind of person that I know from listening to your podcast and reading your work that you speak to often, and that's somebody who finds themselves without an income. Or certainly far less than adequate, maybe no job at all. And they're a believer, they're praying, why isn't God fixing this? Why isn't he showing me a job? I have a student in one of the college classes I'm teaching. Her family is wrestling with this and really wondering, where is God in all this? Doesn't he care? What do I do? Speak to that person. After we've unpacked that God does want you to have a meaningful, purposeful, and profitable work, but I'm not there now.
Yeah, I live here in the Nashville area. We have thousands of people that come to Nashville because they want to make it in the music industry. I love that they're excited about that. But there are three legs to the stool. And if there's one missing, you know what happens to a two-legged stool? It'll fall over every time. So those three legs are passion, talent, and money. Now, there are a lot of people, even understanding God's gifts, who are very passionate and maybe very talented. I mean, think about the people in Christian music that come to Nashville. They're very passionate, they're very talented, but they've never created an economic model. They can't do that. They can't continue doing that. I mean, I confront those people and say, look, you don't have a business, you don't have a job, you don't have a career. All you have is a hobby. If you have passion and talent but no money, all you have is a hobby. And if you're a provider for a family, you can't justify that. So you've got to do something that creates an economic model. Now, if you can do that within music or art or sculpture or poetry or whatever it happens to be, those creative skills that people are drawn to, that's fine. And certainly a lot of people have. I mean, my next door neighbor is, multi-millionaire. I won't mention his name, but you would know his name because he did that in the music industry. Wonderful Christian guy, and he's extremely wealthy. But if you can't figure that out, then do something where you make money to provide for your family and consider what you're doing, even though it's your passion, something you may devote 15 hours a week to. You can't justify this. Well, God called me to it, and I know I'm poor. Here's another example that'll probably help shed light on this. So I was working with a young lady. She's a family friend, and she's very gifted as a singer. And so she would get opportunities to sing at, small churches on Sunday night. Well, she was living in people's living room, sleeping on couches, had an old broken down car. And so she'd go out to sing at a little church. Well, she's praying that these people would give her enough in a love offering that she can buy groceries on Monday morning. And I said, Debbie, why are you putting yourself in this position? This is not something God put you in this position. I said, you have other skills. You're competent in administrative kind of skills. Let's get you a job. She got a job. Went to work for a major company here. She got her own apartment. She bought a new car. Now when she goes out to sing, she doesn't have that pressure. She can sing from a full heart, knowing that if they bless her with money, fine. If they don't, she's okay. She can continue to share her gifts in ministry in that way. Well, guess what? She has more opportunities to go sing and more love offerings than she ever has. But she's set her life up so that she didn't put that kind of unrealistic pressure on that area of giftedness.
Thank you, Dan, for your ministry. And it is. I really believe what you are doing is a ministry. If somebody is listening and they want to find out about your resources, your books, your podcasts, the multitude of things you make available to help people find what God has called them to do and build it into their life, where can they go?
Well, thank you. 48 Days, that's pretty much our brand. So anything 48 Days, you'll find 48days.com. And then we have the 48 Days Eagles community, which is just a large community of people who are sharing ideas and resources readily and raising the success level of everybody. So we have in there writers and speakers and coaches and people with all kinds of ideas they're pursuing. And that you can find at 48dayseagles.com. And I also appreciate you, Carol, talking about the fact that what I'm doing as a ministry. It's really interesting because I am not a not-for-profit. I'm very much a regular business. Yes, it grew out of a Sunday school class, but I structured it as a regular business because I love selling. I love being in the business world. I've been an entrepreneur forever. I've never had a real job. I've just followed these kind of opportunities and built on those. And it's interesting to me that people refer to my business so frequently as a ministry. I'm honored by that. I love that people call it a ministry, and yet it's a very traditional for-profit business.
Well, you are illustrating in who you are these very things that you are helping other people understand. And I, for one, want to say thank you. We'll make sure that those links are in the show notes for this podcast as well. And a really huge thank you, Dan, for spending this time with us. It's an honor.
Well, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, and I hope that we encourage your listeners, too, to realize this is a very doable process. We can be fully in God's alignment, God's calling, and thrive and prosper at the same time.
Amen. Thank you so much. Wasn't that encouraging? At whatever stage in your career you are, understanding who God created you to be and creatively employing that in service for others can do so much for your well-being, for God's kingdom. I hope you check out Dan's resources. His primary website, as he mentioned, is 48days.com, the number 48days.com. There's more at 48dayseagles.com. In our show notes, you will find the links to connect with Dan on social media, and also the link to his New York Times best-selling book, 48 Days to the Work You Love. Thanks for joining us on this episode and every episode. I'd love to hear from you. Want to remind you that I read every comment personally. If you have a question or perhaps something you'd like us to address on an upcoming episode, you can go to the podcast page on drcarolministries.com site, and I will be more than happy to hear from you. Now, until next time, may God bless you.